You need to leave him. File for divorce. That's what Dr. Patel told me the same day she told me my husband might be trying to kill our unborn child. Up until that moment, my life had been aggressively ordinary. I'm Marissa Klein, 37 years old, vendor contract manager for a farm equipment distributor off Edgewood Road in Cedar Rapids. My days revolve around spreadsheets, bulk orders of hydraulic fittings, and emails about delayed tractor shipments. I eat microwaved leftovers at my desk and argue with suppliers about freight charges. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, predictable, safe, or at least I thought it was. I'd been married to Owen for 6 years. He's 40, a regional sales rep for Prairie Crest Solutions, agricultural chemicals, fertilizers, herbicides. When we met at a friend's 4th of July barbecue, he remembered I preferred diet soda over beer. The next time I saw him, he showed up holding one. That was Owen in the beginning. Attentive, deliberate, generous with small gestures that made you feel like the only person in the room. We weren't planning to have children. We'd talked about it in vague, someday language. When I found out I was pregnant at 16 weeks, late, unexpected, surreal, I braced myself for him to panic. Instead, he hugged me tightly and said, "We'll figure it out." His voice sounded right, warm, supportive. But there was a flicker in his eyes, like he was running numbers in his head. I told myself I imagined it. Pregnancy hormones make you sensitive, everyone says. Around that same time, Owen started making me breakfast. That sentence still sounds ridiculous. In 6 years of marriage, that man had never voluntarily prepared anything that required more than pushing a button on the microwave. But suddenly, every morning at 6 a.m., he was blending protein shakes. Banana, almond milk, blueberries, some vanilla protein powder he claimed was clean. He'd set the glass on the counter with a little sticky note, "Fuel for Mama." It was sweet. So sweet I bragged about it at work. "They don't make them like that anymore," my coworker Janine said when I told her. I believed that too. The shakes didn't taste great. Bitter, chalky. I figured it was the prenatal supplement powder he insisted on adding. Extra nutrients, he'd say. You need more now. He'd watch me drink it, smiling like a proud nutritionist. At my 20-week anatomy scan, everything changed. If you've never been in that dim ultrasound room, it's hard to explain how much you rely on tone. The machine hums. The gel is cold. The tech narrates what you're seeing, spine, femur, heartbeat, like a guided tour of your own miracle. Dr. Patel took over midway through the scan, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. She stared at the screen longer than expected. Then she glanced at her tablet, then back at the screen. Her hand, still holding the wand against my belly, went still. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice already too small. "Just give me a moment," she said gently. She typed quickly, pulled up my recent blood work and leaned closer. Her expression didn't look confused, and that scared me more. "Marissa," she said finally, turning the tablet so I could see, "have you started any new supplements recently?" "No. Just the prenatal vitamins you recommended." She nodded slowly. "There's a compound in your blood that shouldn't be there. It's found in certain industrial herbicides. In high concentrations, it can be dangerous in pregnancy." My brain latched onto the word herbicides. "I work around farm equipment," I said quickly. "Maybe exposure from the warehouse?" She shook her head. "These levels aren't consistent with incidental exposure. This looks ingested, and not once. Repeatedly. Ingested, repeatedly." My thoughts didn't explode. They rearranged themselves. Owen, the shakes, every morning. Dr. Patel's voice remained steady. "I don't want to alarm you prematurely, but until we understand this, you need to stop consuming anything you didn't prepare yourself, and I strongly recommend you do not go home right now." Not go home. That's when the floor seemed to tilt. I sat in my Subaru in the clinic parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My phone buzzed. "How'd it go, babe?" "Shakes in the fridge." There it was, the heart emoji, the casual sweetness. Suddenly I could taste it, the bitterness at the back of my throat from that morning's shake. I thought about how he'd stand by the counter while I drank it, how his eyes tracked the glass from blender to mouth, how he'd ask, "You finished it?" I told myself I was being paranoid. Then I replayed Dr. Patel's words, ingested repeatedly. I didn't drive home. I drove to the Hy-Vee parking lot instead and cried so hard I had to turn off the engine because my hands were shaking. I pressed my palm against my stomach and whispered, "I'm so sorry," though I didn't know who I was apologizing to, my baby or myself. Then I did the only thing that felt rational. I called Natalie. My cousin is 42 and a criminal defense attorney in Des Moines. She doesn't catastrophize. She calculates. I told her everything. Dr. Patel's warning, the compound, the shakes. She was quiet for 5 seconds. "Save one," she said finally. "Don't confront him. Save a shake. We test it." And just like that, my ordinary life split in two. There was the version where my husband was suddenly a health-conscious partner trying to support a pregnancy, and the version where every morning at 6 a.m. he was blending something that could end it. I went home that night and gave the best performance of my life. If there were awards for pretending your world wasn't collapsing, I would have accepted mine with a steady smile and a gracious speech. Owen was already on the couch when I walked in, laptop open, some agricultural sales dashboard glowing on the screen. He looked up immediately. "Hey, how'd it go?" I forced brightness into my voice. "Everything looks good. She said the baby's measuring right on track." He stood, crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped me in a hug. It felt practiced. "See? I told you. We're good. We're good." The blender was clean, drying on a towel. A fresh shake sat in the fridge in a tall glass with condensation running down the side, pale purple from blueberries. Innocent looking. "Drink it before it separates," he called from the living room. My hands didn't shake. I'm proud of that. I poured the shake into a stainless steel travel mug while his back was turned, deliberately filling it halfway. I took the glass to the sink, tilted it toward my lips just enough to let it touch them, then quietly dumped the rest down the drain while running water to disguise the sound. The half I'd saved went into my tote bag when he went to shower. I told him I had a headache and went to bed early. Instead of sleeping, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every morning for the last 2 months. Him measuring powder. Him insisting I finish it. Him wiping the counter while watching me drink. At 5:52 a.m., he was up again. I pretended to be asleep. The blender roared to life in the kitchen. The next morning, I drove the sample to a FedEx location and overnighted it to a private toxicology lab Natalie trusted. She texted me confirmation. 5 business days. 5 days of pretending my husband might not be poisoning me. That's when I started really watching him. Owen had always been attentive, but now I noticed the intensity. He didn't just glance at the shake while I drank it. He tracked it. His eyes followed the glass from counter to hand to mouth. When I set it down halfway once and said I felt full, his jaw tightened. "Finish it," he said lightly. "You need the calories." It wasn't a suggestion. One morning I told him Janine had brought breakfast sandwiches to work and I'd already eaten. For a split second his expression changed. Not confusion, not disappointment, irritation. Irritation. Then it was gone. "No worries," he said quickly. "Just drink it later, okay?" That was the first time fear moved from theory to bone-deep certainty. He also started carrying his briefcase everywhere. Bathroom, garage, even to take the recycling bin to the curb. It was ridiculous. And it stood out because Owen used to lose things constantly. He once left his wallet in the freezer. I'm not exaggerating. On the 4th day, he forgot. He ran back inside to grab a jacket he'd left on the chair by the door. The briefcase sat on the kitchen table. I stood there staring at it like it was going to explode. You shouldn't look, I told myself. I looked. Inside was paperwork, a laptop, a receipt folder, and beneath those, a prepaid flip phone. My pulse roared in my ears. I powered it on. No passcode. There were only 2 active threads. One labelled L. Is she still taking it daily? You need to be consistent. We can't risk overlap. Overlap, I scrolled. Once the miscarriage happens, we move forward. I'm not waiting forever. The air left my lungs in one long silent exhale. Lila Monroe. I didn't know her yet, but I would. I snapped photos of every message with my own phone and put the burner back exactly where I found it. Closed the briefcase. Returned to the couch. By the time Owen came back into the room, I was scrolling Instagram like any normal wife on a weekday afternoon. That night I couldn't sleep. Instead, I opened our online banking. I wish I hadn't. Over the last 5 months, $18,000 had disappeared from our joint account in small, careful increments. $1,200 here, $800 there. Always labelled as generic autopay transfers. Enough to blend in. Not enough to trigger an alert. The money had been routed to an account I didn't recognize. My stomach turned. 5 days felt like 5 years. Every morning he blended. Every morning I pretended to drink it. Every morning I poured it down the sink once he left for work. I rinsed the glass carefully, left just enough residue to look real. And every morning he watched. I started locking the bathroom door when I showered. I started keeping my phone on me at all times. On day 6, Natalie called. The lab confirmed the presence of a concentrated herbicide derivative, the same compound Dr. Patel flagged in my blood work, high enough to cause fetal loss with repeated exposure, low enough not to immediately hospitalize me. It's deliberate, Natalie said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Marissa, you need to go to the police. I stared at the kitchen counter while Owen stood 5 feet away, rinsing blueberries for tomorrow's batch. My husband. The man who kissed my forehead every night. The man who now felt like a stranger wearing my husband's face. I hung up the phone and met his eyes across the room. He smiled, and for the first time I saw it clearly. He wasn't worried about me. He was waiting. I didn't confront him. That's the part people always ask about later. Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you throw the glass at his head? Why didn't you demand an explanation? Because once you know someone is capable of quietly trying to end your pregnancy, you don't escalate. You survive. The morning after the lab results came back, I drove straight to the Cedar Rapids Police Department instead of work. I'd barely slept. My hands felt steady in that eerie way they do when your body has moved past panic and into purpose. Detective Halbriggs met me in a small interview room with beige walls and a coffee stain on the table. He didn't look like a TV detective. He looked like someone's uncle who fixed lawnmowers on weekends. Calm, observant. I handed him everything. The toxicology report, screenshots of the burner phone messages, copies of the bank transfers, photos of the flip phone itself. He flipped through each page slowly, methodically. Has he confronted you about anything? He asked. No. Does he know you're suspicious? No. He leaned back in his chair. Good. Good. It was surreal hearing the word applied to my situation. He tapped the lab report. This is strong, but what makes this airtight is video. We need to see him putting the substance in the shake. The word airtight made my chest tighten. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a marital problem. It was a case. I can't install something without him noticing, I said. You don't, he replied. We will, with your consent. It's your kitchen. That afternoon, while Owen was at work closing a big fertilizer account, a technician came to the house. The device looked like a standard smart speaker charging dock, matte black, unremarkable. It sat on the counter angled toward the blender. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never question it. When Owen came home, he walked right past it. I stood at the sink, washing lettuce while he leaned against the counter, telling me about a new client. I watched his reflection in the window and wondered how many lies he could hold at once without cracking. The first morning with the camera, he made the shake like usual. Bananas, almond milk, protein powder, spinach. No vial, no drops. My stomach dropped anyway. Had he stopped? Did he sense something? I texted Detective Briggs from the bathroom. Nothing yet, he replied. Be patient. People follow patterns. Patience felt impossible when every second I stayed in that house felt like standing on a frozen lake, waiting for the ice to give way. The second morning, same thing. Regular ingredients. No hidden cabinet reach. I started doubting myself. Maybe the lab made a mistake. Maybe someone else contaminated it. Maybe this was all some insane misunderstanding, and I was about to destroy my marriage over paranoia. Then I remembered the burner phone. We can't risk overlap. Overlap with what? On the third day I found out. At 6:03 a.m. the camera recorded Owen walking into the kitchen in boxers and a wrinkled Prairie Crest t-shirt. He didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp by the stove. He opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, reached behind a tin of espresso beans I never touched, pulled out a small amber vial. My heart pounded so hard when I watched the footage later that I thought I might faint. He removed the cap carefully, tilted it, measured drops into the blender before adding the fruit. Then he rinsed the vial under the tap, dried it with a paper towel, and slid it back into its hiding place. Measured, like someone adding vanilla extract to a recipe. 17 minutes of clear, undeniable footage. When Detective Briggs called me that afternoon, his voice had changed, less cautious, more certain. "We have enough," he said. "You need to leave the house today." I packed while Owen was at work. I didn't take much. 2 suitcases, important documents, my prenatal vitamins, the ultrasound photo from the 20-week scan, the one taken before everything went quiet. I paused in the kitchen before leaving. The blender sat on the counter, spotless. For a split second, I imagined smashing it against the tile, but destruction felt loud, and I needed quiet. I drove to a hotel downtown that Natalie had booked under her name. At 9:12 a.m. the next morning, Detective Briggs called. They're bringing him in now. Owen was arrested at Prairie Crest headquarters. 2 officers walked into the sales floor and asked him to step into the hallway. He didn't resist, didn't argue. According to the report, he went pale. Lila Monroe came into the station later that day. She had no idea I was still married to him. He'd told her I was an unstable ex, that we were finalizing paperwork, that I couldn't accept it. She was 23 weeks pregnant, further along than me. Overlap. He'd needed one pregnancy gone before the other became visible. When confronted with the video, Owen tried to say the substance was a harmless supplement. Then he claimed he didn't know it could cause harm in small doses. The footage ended that defense. Measured drops. Hidden vial. Bank records showed he'd been transferring money to a separate account to secure an apartment in Iowa City. Furniture deposits. Security payments. A second life already staged. By the time I met with a divorce attorney that afternoon, the word husband felt foreign in my mouth. Attempted poisoning. Reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman. Financial fraud. Charges sound clinical. They don't capture the quiet horror of watching someone you loved tilt a vial over a blender. That night, in the hotel room, I stood by the window and placed both hands over my stomach. My daughter kicked. Strong, insistent. And for the first time since Dr. Patel's silence filled that ultrasound room, I allowed myself to believe something else. He had tried to end this story, but he hadn't succeeded. The house felt different the first time I walked back into it after Owen's arrest. Not haunted, not heavy, just stripped. The police had already executed a search warrant. The amber vial was gone from behind the espresso tin. The burner phone had been logged into evidence. Even the cabinet above the refrigerator looked exposed somehow, like a secret had been peeled out of it and the drywall still remembered. Natalie came with me. She insisted. "You don't do first re-entries alone," she said, like this was something people did often. I moved slowly through the kitchen, touching nothing at first. The blender was still on the counter, perfectly clean. Innocent looking. I unplugged it. Not violently, not dramatically. Just removed it from the outlet and placed it in a trash bag. I wasn't keeping the machine that almost became a weapon. The refrigerator hummed. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Owen had always wiped surfaces obsessively. I used to think it was just neatness. Now I understood it was control. He needed everything precise, measured, accounted for, including me. The divorce paperwork was filed within 48 hours of his arrest. My attorney, Rachel Brenner, didn't waste time. "Given the criminal charges," she said, tapping the folder in front of her, "we're filing fault-based, attempted poisoning and endangerment. We also have financial concealment." She slid bank statements across the desk. I'd known about the $18,000. I hadn't known the full picture. Owen had opened a separate checking account under O.J. Klein, just different enough to avoid automatic flags. Over 5 months, he'd siphoned nearly $22,000 total once fees and transfers were traced. Security deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment in Iowa City, a furniture warehouse purchase, baby supplies. He'd been furnishing a nursery, just not for my child. I should have felt fury, fire, something explosive. Instead, I felt hollowed out. Like the man I'd married had been carefully erased and replaced with a stranger wearing his skin. Lila Monroe requested to speak with me through the detective. I surprised myself by agreeing. We met in a conference room at the police department. She looked younger in person, smaller. Her hands trembled when she folded them in her lap. "I didn't know," she said immediately. "He told me you were divorced, that you couldn't let go." I studied her face, searching for malice. I found fear. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" I asked quietly. "October. Mine had been November." Overlap. She swallowed. "He said he just needed time to untangle things. I thought that meant paperwork." I nodded slowly. For him it meant something else. There was a moment between us, heavy, complicated. Two women tied together by the same lie. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I believe you," I said. And I did. The prosecutor later told me her testimony would strengthen the case, but even without it, the video was devastating. 17 minutes of methodical intent. Owen's bail was set at $200,000. He couldn't pay it. Prairie Crest terminated him within 2 days of the arrest. His company laptop was confiscated, his email access revoked. Just like that, the man who once strutted around sales conferences with branded polos and confident smiles was reduced to an inmate number in Lynn County Jail. He tried to reach me through his attorney. Rachel didn't even blink when she relayed the message. He'd like to talk. "No," I said. There was nothing left to say. The next doctor's appointment felt surreal. I sat in the same ultrasound room where everything had first unraveled. This time, Dr. Patel smiled before she even spoke. "Levels are nearly undetectable," she said, reviewing my updated blood work. "You stopped exposure in time." In time. Another few weeks, she admitted gently, and we might have been discussing loss. I lay back on the table as she moved the wand across my stomach. The room wasn't silent this time. It was filled with the steady, rhythmic sound of a heartbeat. Strong, consistent. I cried without embarrassment. When I got home, my home, no longer ours, I did something simple. I made scrambled eggs. No blender, no protein powder, no measured drops of anything. Just eggs. Butter. Salt. I stood at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, and realized how much of my body had been living in fight or flight for weeks. The absence of fear felt almost unfamiliar. The house was quieter without him. Not just physically quieter, emotionally quieter. No hovering, no subtle monitoring, no eyes tracking my movements from across the counter. I walked into the bedroom later and opened the closet. His suits were still hanging there, pressed and orderly. I stared at them for a long moment before pulling them down one by one and laying them in a pile. Not out of rage, out of reclamation. By the time I finished, the closet looked like mine again. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and placed both hands over my stomach. My daughter kicked sharply, as if reminding me she was still here. "I've got you," I whispered. The charges would move through the courts. The divorce would finalize. There would be hearings and paperwork and long procedural days ahead. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as one simple truth. He had tried to write an ending for us. And instead, he'd handed me the pen. The trial didn't feel dramatic. There were no surprise witnesses bursting through doors, no gasps from the gallery, no last-minute confessions shouted across the courtroom. It was quieter than that, clinical, methodical, and somehow that made it worse. By the time the preliminary hearings were done, I had learned more legal vocabulary than I ever wanted to know. Intent, premeditation, aggravated assault, administration of a harmful substance, financial concealment. Every phrase sounded like it belonged in a textbook. None of them captured what it felt like to realize your husband had been calculating the end of your pregnancy over morning smoothies. Owen sat at the defense table in a suit I recognized. Navy, subtle pinstripe, the one he wore to our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. He looked thinner, paler, smaller somehow. He didn't look at me. The prosecution led with the video. 17 minutes. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the footage played on the screen. I watched him from the side instead of watching the video again. I had already memorized every second of it. The cabinet door opening, the espresso tin moving, the vial, the measured drops, the rinse under the tap. When the clip ended, the room was silent in that specific way that means everyone understands what they just saw. His attorney tried to argue context, tried to suggest the substance was misunderstood, that dosage levels weren't definitively proven to cause harm in every case. Then the toxicology expert testified. She explained the compound in simple, devastating language. Repeated ingestion increases risk of fetal demise. The concentration in my blood aligned precisely with the amount added to the shakes. The drop pattern in the video matched the accumulation curve in my lab results. It was science, not emotion. Facts don't blink when you challenge them. Lila testified too. She looked composed, but I could see her fingers shaking when she adjusted the microphone. She described how Owen told her he was divorced. How he promised they'd be official soon. How he talked about starting fresh before her pregnancy became complicated. Complicated. That was the word he'd used. Not life. Not responsibility. Complicated. The prosecutor introduced the bank records next. Transfer after transfer into the hidden account. Lease agreement. Furniture invoices. A crib purchase dated 2 weeks before he increased the dosage in my shakes. That detail hit me harder than I expected. He hadn't acted in panic. He had adjusted strategy. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand without looking at him. I spoke clearly, calmly. I described the ultrasound room, the silence, the way Dr. Patel's voice changed when she said ingested repeatedly. I described the bitterness of the shakes, the way he watched me drink them. I described finding the burner phone. We can't risk overlap. The defense tried to ask if I was certain the phone was his, if I had any history of anxiety that could cloud perception, if perhaps workplace exposure was still a possibility. I held their gaze steadily. There is a video, I said, of my husband measuring poison into my breakfast. There wasn't much left to debate after that. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts, attempted administration of a harmful substance, reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman, financial fraud. He finally looked at me when the verdict was read. Not with anger, not even with regret, with something closer to disbelief, as if he genuinely hadn't expected consequences to materialize. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge didn't raise his voice, didn't grandstand. He simply listed the facts. The breach of trust, the calculated nature of the act, the vulnerability of a pregnant woman relying on her spouse for safety. Owen was sentenced to 8 years with eligibility for parole after 5. His attorney asked for leniency, cited stress, emotional confusion, poor decision-making. The judge responded quietly, "Stress does not explain measured drops into a blender." That sentence will stay with me for the rest of my life. Afterward, in the hallway, reporters lingered. Cameras hovered at a distance. Natalie stood at my side like a wall. I didn't make a statement. There was nothing to perform. The divorce finalized shortly after sentencing. Because of the criminal conviction and financial misconduct, I retained full ownership of the house. The hidden account funds were partially recovered. His share of marital assets was minimal. It felt strange signing paperwork that officially ended something that had already shattered months earlier. When I returned home that afternoon, I stood in the nursery. The room had once been theoretical, paint swatches taped to walls, Pinterest boards saved on my phone. Now it was real. A crib assembled by my brother, soft yellow walls, a rocking chair by the window. I placed my hand over my stomach. 31 weeks. My daughter shifted, strong and steady. The legal system had done its part, but the deeper work, the rebuilding of trust in my own instincts, that was still mine to do. I thought back to the ultrasound room, the silence, the moment everything pivoted. If Dr. Patel hadn't asked the right question, if I'd dismissed the bitterness of the shakes, if I'd chosen confrontation over caution, the outcome might have been different. Owen had tried to eliminate a complication. Instead, he dismantled his own life piece by piece. And as I stood there in that quiet nursery, sunlight filtering through the blinds, I understood something with absolute clarity. He lost everything. But I didn't. My daughter was born on a quiet Tuesday morning in late October, just as the leaves in Cedar Rapids were turning copper and gold. Labor wasn't cinematic. There was no dramatic rush through traffic, no screaming at nurses. It was long, steady, exhausting work, like my body understood that bringing her safely into the world required patience, not panic. Natalie was in the room with me. She held my hand during contractions and made dry, sarcastic comments about hospital coffee in between them. At one point she leaned close and whispered, "You realize this is the only delivery room in Iowa where the baby already has a felony case file attached to her origin story." I laughed mid-contraction, which I do not recommend. When my daughter finally cried, sharp, indignant, alive, it felt like something inside my chest unlocked. They placed her on my chest, warm and slippery and perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair. I traced her cheek with one trembling finger and whispered, "You're safe." That word meant more than it ever had before. I named her Elena, not after anyone, just because it sounded strong and soft at the same time. The first night in the hospital, when the room finally went quiet and the monitors hummed steadily, I stared at her bassinet and thought about how close we had come to a different ending. A few more weeks of bitterness in a smoothie, a few more measured drops. The thought didn't paralyze me anymore. It strengthened me. Owen wasn't there for her birth. He learned about it through his attorney, who forwarded a formal notice related to custody filings. He sent a request to see her. My lawyer responded swiftly. Supervised visitation only, pending psychological evaluation. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had demonstrated calculated harm toward her before she even had a name. That doesn't get rewritten with apologies. The months after her birth were a blur of feedings, paperwork, and quiet recalibration. I returned to my house slowly, rearranged furniture, repainted the bedroom, donated anything that still carried his imprint. The espresso tin was the last thing I threw away. I found it months later, tucked in the back of a pantry shelf I hadn't reorganized yet. My hands didn't shake when I picked it up. It was just metal. It had only ever been metal. The danger had never been the object. It had been the person holding it. Owen's sentencing held. No successful appeals. 8 years. I don't track the exact number of days anymore. I don't need to. Lila moved out of state before her baby was born. She sent me a short message once, just a photo of her son's hand wrapped around her finger and a caption, "We're okay." I responded with a photo of Elena's tiny fist doing the same. 2 separate lives. Same lesson learned the hard way. Therapy became part of my routine. Not because I was falling apart, but because I refused to carry silent fractures into my daughter's future. My therapist once asked me what I felt when I thought about Owen now. I expected anger. What surfaced instead was clarity. He didn't wake up one morning and become a villain. The signs had always been there. Control disguised as care, precision disguised as attentiveness. I'd mistaken monitoring for devotion, oversight for love. I don't hate him, but I will never ignore silence again. Now when Elena toddles across the kitchen floor because yes, she's walking now, I watch her with the kind of focus that feels protective, not possessive. I cook breakfast most mornings. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit cut into careful pieces. No blender. Sometimes I add a little cinnamon just because I like the way it smells. There are still moments when the memory surfaces. The dim ultrasound room, Dr. Patel's careful tone, the text message with the heart emoji. But those moments no longer define me. They remind me. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to bitterness. Silence is information. Last week, Elena stood on her tiptoes and reached for the counter while I was cooking. I lifted her into my arms and she pressed her forehead against mine, laughing for no reason other than the joy of being alive. That sound fills the house now, not the hum of a blender, not the quiet calculation of someone measuring out harm, just laughter. Owen once thought he was solving a complication. He believed he could quietly remove an obstacle and step into a new life untouched. What he never understood is that truth has a way of surfacing, like something toxic rising in blood work, undeniable and measurable. He built a plan in secret. I built a future in the open. And every morning, when I stand at my stove, sunlight pouring through the window, my daughter tugging at my pajama sleeve, I know something with absolute certainty. The silence that once nearly broke me is the same silence that saved us. Because I listened. Life advice? Trust your instincts, especially when something tastes off, literally or metaphorically. Silence is data, patterns matter, and love should never require you to ignore your own safety. Pay attention, ask questions, and never confuse control with care. And if you enjoy stories where truth wins and karma clocks in on time, subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel and drop a comment. I promise, we read everything.